The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the dirt road to my cabin into a muddy nightmare. I'd bought the place 6 months ago, thinking isolation would help me write my novel. Instead, I'd spent most of my time staring at blank pages and listening to the woods creak around me. The knock came at 9:47 p.m. I know because I was watching the digital clock on my laptop, procrastinating on chapter 3. The sound cut through the steady drumming of rain on the metal roof like a gunshot. 3 deliberate raps. Pause. 3 more. I wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest neighbor was old Mrs. Henley, 2 miles down the mountain, and she'd never venture out in weather like this. The grocery delivery guy had already come Tuesday. My ex-wife certainly wouldn't drive up here, especially not after our last conversation. Another series of knocks. More insistent this time. I closed my laptop and walked to the front door, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood. The porch light had burned out last week, and I kept forgetting to replace it. Through the peephole, I could see nothing but darkness and the silver streaks of rain illuminated by the living room light spilling through the windows. "Who is it?" I called out. No answer, just the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I waited, my hand on the deadbolt. The smart thing would be to ignore it, but curiosity has always been my weakness. That's what got me into journalism in the first place, before everything fell apart. The knocking started again, not on the door this time, on the window to my right, then the window to my left, back to the door. Someone was moving around my porch, knocking on different surfaces in a slow, methodical pattern. My heart began to race. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and saw the dreaded no service symbol. The storm had knocked out the cell tower again. The landline had been disconnected when I moved in, and I'd never bothered to have it reconnected. "I'm armed," I shouted, which was a lie. The closest thing I had to a weapon was a kitchen knife. The knocking stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The rain seemed louder now, almost deafening. Or maybe that was just my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, a voice, muffled by the storm and the thick wooden door. "I need help." It was a woman's voice, young, frightened. I looked through the peephole again, still nothing but darkness. "Step into the light where I can see you." "I can't. He's still out there. Please, just let me in. I'm hurt." Every instinct screamed at me to keep the door locked, but the desperation in her voice cut through my paranoia. I'd heard that same tone before, covering stories about domestic violence, interviewing victims in hospital beds. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open, keeping the chain latch engaged. She stumbled forward into the thin wedge of light. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and her face was pale, almost ghostly in the yellow glow from my living room. She wore a soaked denim jacket over what looked like a white nightgown, now transparent and clinging to her thin frame. No shoes. Her bare feet were muddy and bleeding. "Jesus," I whispered, and undid the chain. She practically fell through the doorway, gasping and shivering. I caught her arm to steady her, and her skin was ice cold. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." I shut the door behind her and engaged both locks. "What happened? Are you okay?" She stood in my entryway, dripping water onto the hardwood, her arms wrapped around herself. She couldn't have been more than 25. Pretty, despite the circumstances, but her eyes, there was something unsettling about her eyes. They seemed too bright, almost luminous in the dim light. "My boyfriend," she said, her teeth chattering. He's not well. We were camping down by Miller's Creek, and he started acting strange, violent. I had to run. Miller's Creek was about 3 miles through the woods, rough terrain in good weather, nearly impossible in a storm like this. "Let me get you some dry clothes," I said, "and I'll call the police." "No." The word came out sharp, panicked. "No police, please. He has friends on the force. They won't believe me." I hesitated. Something felt off about her story, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was just the shock of having a stranger show up at my isolated cabin in the middle of the night. "At least let me get you a towel and something warm to wear." I gestured toward the living room. "Sit by the fire, I'll be right back." She nodded and moved toward the fireplace, leaving a trail of muddy water behind her. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and grabbed a pair of sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt from my dresser, plus a thick towel from the bathroom. When I came back downstairs, she was standing with her back to me, staring into the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment her silhouette looked wrong somehow. Too tall, too angular. "Here," I said, and she turned around. Normal again, just a scared young woman. She took the clothes gratefully. "Is there somewhere I can change?" I pointed to the small bathroom under the stairs. "Through there." While she changed, I put on a pot of coffee and tried to process what was happening. Part of me was already crafting the story in my head. Mysterious woman in the storm. It had all the elements of a good piece. Mystery, danger, human drama. The bathroom door opened, and she emerged wearing my clothes. They were too big for her, making her look even younger and more vulnerable. She'd towel-dried her hair, and it hung in dark waves around her shoulders. "Coffee," I offered. "Please." She settled onto my couch, tucking her bare feet under her. I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Moss. David Chen. I poured 2 mugs and handed her one. So this boyfriend of yours, what's his name? She wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stared into the coffee. Marcus Webb. We've been together for 8 months. Things were good at first, but lately, she trailed off. Lately what? He's been having these episodes. Rage, mostly. But tonight was different. He kept talking about voices, saying someone was watching us from the trees. He became convinced that I was working with them, whoever them was supposed to be. I sat down in the armchair across from her. That sounds like he might need professional help. Mental health issues can— He attacked me, she interrupted, with a knife. I managed to get away, but I had to run through the woods. I saw your light and— She shuddered. I didn't know where else to go. The story made sense, but something still nagged at me. Maybe it was the journalist in me, always looking for holes in people's accounts. Or maybe it was just the strangeness of the whole situation. We should at least call someone, I said. A friend, family member, someone who can help you figure out what to do next. I don't have anyone, she said quickly. My family's back in Oregon, and my friends. Marcus has been isolating me from them for months. Please, can I just stay here tonight? I'll leave first thing in the morning, I promise. The desperation in her voice was genuine. At least it seemed genuine. And what was I going to do? Throw her back out into the storm? Of course, I said. You can take the couch. I'll get you some blankets. Thank you. She smiled for the first time since arriving, and it transformed her face completely. You're very kind. I was heading upstairs to get bedding when I heard her speak again, softly. David? I turned back. She was still sitting on the couch, but something had changed in her posture. She seemed more relaxed now, almost too relaxed. Yes. Do you live here alone? The question sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. Yeah, just me. She nodded slowly. That must get lonely. Sometimes. I forced a smile, but I came here to write, so the isolation is actually helpful. Fewer distractions. What are you writing about? A novel. Crime fiction, mostly. Nothing too exciting. Her eyes seemed to brighten at that. I love a good mystery. What's this one about? I found myself relaxing again. Normal conversation. It's about a journalist who gets pulled into investigating a series of disappearances in a small mountain town. Classic fish out of water setup. Disappearances. She leaned forward, interested. What kind? People vanishing without a trace. No bodies, no evidence. Just gone. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those unnaturally bright eyes. That's fascinating. Have you researched similar real cases? Some. There are actually quite a few unsolved disappearances in rural areas like this. People go hiking and never come back. Sometimes their cars are found abandoned, but the people just vanish. Into thin air, she murmured. Exactly. Thunder crashed outside. Closer now. The lights flickered briefly. I should get you those blankets, I said. David? She called again as I reached the stairs. Have you ever wondered what happens to them? The people who disappear? I paused, my hand on the banister. What do you mean? I mean they have to go somewhere, right? People don't just cease to exist. There was something unsettling about the way she said it. Too casual, too thoughtful, like she was discussing the weather instead of missing persons. I guess that's what makes it a mystery, I said and headed upstairs. In the linen closet I grabbed a spare pillow and a couple of heavy blankets. As I pulled them down, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked tired, stressed. Maybe I was reading too much into things. The woman downstairs was just a victim who needed help. My writer's imagination was running wild with paranoid scenarios. But as I headed back downstairs, I found myself moving quietly, listening. The house was too quiet. No sound of her moving around, no clink of her coffee mug. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked into the living room. She was gone. The coffee mug sat empty on the side table, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The wet clothes she'd been wearing were still in a pile by the bathroom door. Sarah, I called out. No response. I checked the bathroom. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. I even looked in the small pantry closet, feeling foolish. Then I noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. I rushed to it and yanked it open, stepping out onto the porch. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and I could see a bit farther into the darkness. Sarah, where are you? Nothing but the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the distant rumble of thunder moving away. I was about to go back inside when I saw them. Footprints in the mud leading away from my porch, but they weren't normal footprints. They were too long, too narrow, almost like they'd been made by something walking on its toes. I followed them with my eyes as far as I could see. They led straight into the tree line, about 50 yards from my cabin, where they disappeared into the shadows. A rational explanation formed in my mind. She'd seen someone coming, maybe her boyfriend had tracked her down, and she'd fled again. The weird footprints were just a trick of the mud and rain. Feet could look strange when they sank into soft earth. But as I stood there in the cold drizzle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I went back inside and locked the door, then checked all the windows to make sure they were secure. I tried to convince myself that Sarah would be okay, that she'd found help somewhere else, But I kept thinking about those footprints. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat down at my laptop. Maybe I could channel this weird energy into my writing. But when I opened the document, I found something that made my blood turn to ice. There was new text on the page, text I hadn't written. David is alone now. David writes about people who disappear. Soon David will understand what that means. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the document. More text appeared below. Sarah is hungry. Sarah has been hungry for so long. I slammed the laptop shut and backed away from it. This wasn't possible. Sarah had been sitting across the room the entire time. She couldn't have used my computer without me noticing. Could she? I thought back to the conversation. Had there been a moment when I'd looked away long enough for her to... No, it was impossible, unless she'd done it while I was upstairs getting the blankets. But that would mean she'd known my password, and that she'd deliberately written those disturbing messages. Which would mean a soft tapping came from the living room window, the same rhythmic pattern as before. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A pale face stared back at me from the other side of the glass. It was Sarah, but something was wrong with her face. Her mouth was too wide, stretched into an impossible grin that revealed far too many teeth. And her eyes were completely black now, like 2 holes burned into her skull. She raised one hand and waved at me. Her fingers were too long, ending in what looked like claws. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tapping moved to another window, then another. She was circling the house again, just like before. I grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen block and held it in front of me with shaking hands. The tapping stopped. In the silence I heard a new sound, a soft scraping, like fingernails on wood. It was coming from above. She was on the roof. The scraping moved across the ceiling, following a path from the living room toward the back of the house. I tracked it with my eyes, the knife held ready. The sound stopped directly above the kitchen. A piece of ceiling plaster fell to the floor with a soft thud. Then another. She was coming through the roof. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks. Behind me, I heard more plaster falling, then a soft thump as something heavy landed in the kitchen. I got the door open and bolted out into the night, not caring about the rain or the cold. Behind me, the lights in my cabin went out one by one, as if something was moving through each room, extinguishing them. I ran down the muddy driveway toward my car, but when I got there, I saw that all 4 tires had been slashed. Deep, parallel cuts that could only have been made by claws. A sound behind me made me turn. Sarah stood in my doorway, silhouetted against the darkness of the house. She was tall now, much taller than before, and her shape was wrong. Her arms hung down past her knees, and her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "David," she called, and her voice carried impossibly well through the rain. "Where are you going? I thought we were getting to know each other." I backed away, still clutching the knife. "Stay away from me." She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "But David, I'm still so very hungry, and you were so kind to invite me in." That's when I understood. The old folklore I'd read while researching my novel. Creatures that could only enter homes when invited. Things that hunted in remote places where people wouldn't be missed. I'd written about people who disappeared without a trace, and now I was about to become one of them. I turned and ran into the woods, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the branches that tore at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear her following. Not running, just walking at that same methodical pace. She knew these woods better than I did. She knew I had nowhere to go. I stumbled over a fallen log and went down hard, the knife flying from my hand and disappearing into the darkness. As I struggled to get back to my feet, I heard her voice, much closer now. "You write about mysteries, David, but some mysteries are better left unsolved." I crawled forward on my hands and knees, feeling around desperately for the knife. My fingers closed around the handle just as something grabbed my ankle. Her grip was impossibly strong, and her fingers were ice cold. She dragged me backward through the mud and leaves, my fingernails scraping uselessly against the forest floor. "Don't worry," she whispered as she pulled me deeper into the darkness. "You'll understand everything soon. You'll know what happens to people who disappear. You'll become part of the mystery yourself." I managed to flip over and slashed at her with the knife. The blade connected, but instead of blood, something black and viscous oozed from the wound. She didn't even seem to notice. Her face loomed over mine, and in the faint moonlight filtering through the clouds, I could see that she wasn't human at all. Her skin was pale and smooth like marble, and her features kept shifting, as if she couldn't quite decide what face to wear. "Thank you for answering the door, David," she said, and her breath smelled like rotting meat. "I've been so very lonely out here in the woods, but now I have you to keep me company." The last thing I remember is her mouth opening wide, wider than any human mouth should be able to open, revealing row after row of needle-sharp teeth. When the police finally found my cabin 3 days later, after Mrs. Henley reported that my lights had been off for too long, they discovered signs of a struggle but no body. My car was still in the driveway with slashed tires, and there were muddy footprints leading away from the house into the forest. They searched for weeks, bringing in dogs and volunteers from town, but they never found any trace of me. Just like all the others who had vanished in these mountains over the years, the only clue they discovered was my laptop,
still open on the kitchen table. The document I'd been working on contained a single line that I definitely hadn't written. Some doors should never be opened, some invitations should never be extended, and some hungers can never be satisfied. The police filed it under missing person cause unknown, and eventually moved on to other cases. Mrs. Henley still talks about hearing strange sounds from the woods on rainy nights, and hikers occasionally report seeing lights in my abandoned cabin. But I know the truth. I know what's really out there, waiting in the darkness for the next lonely soul to answer an unexpected knock at the door. And sometimes, when the rain is falling hard and the night is at its darkest, Sarah pays a visit to other isolated houses in these mountains. She's still hungry, you see. She's always hungry. She knocks 3 times, pauses, then knocks 3 times again, and she's very good at sounding like someone who desperately needs help.